The argument for radical optimism is something that we all need to make, because we can look at a situation, as a pessimist, seeing the glass half empty, using that metaphor, or seeing the glass half full. A radical optimist actually doesn't see the glass half full, they see the potential to fill the glass even further.
Frederik, welcome to the podcast. It's really a joy to meet you.
Thank you so much, Christopher, for having me.
We've had a fun conversation. I'd say a timely conversation about change and sort of our resistance to change. And we're talking about Brad Stulberg and his book, Master of Change. I'm really excited to have you here today because this is a timely conversation at a pivotal time in history. I mean, our conversation, honestly, Frederik, I don't think could be better, because right now many people are just flat out worried about the future and exhausted by the prospects of it. We're in an election year. The economy is in flux. Morale is low. We've been through a lot of crisis lately. And so I think people are reactionary, tentative even. I'd love for you to give us a biopsy as we start on what you're observing as both a challenge and an opportunity in culture today, and then we'll take the deep dive.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for having me. I think you're describing it in a way that probably a lot of people are feeling right now, right? They feel even, I would push your thoughts even further, they feel even like out of control of their future, right? They feel that someone else or something else is controlling their future, right? It might be politics, it might be the climate, it might be technology, right? It might be the economy, it might be your partner, it might be your employer, you name it, right? We always feel like, someone else is in control of what happens next. And I think what I want to help people to do is take back that control, right? Instead of asking about the future with that question, like, what will the future bring? Ask yourself, what future do I want to create? And getting off of this passive approach towards the future, where we just literally wait every day, right? We wait, and we're listening to the news, and we're watching news, and we're reading the papers, and we're listening to friends and futurists and everything who tell us about the future. And I would go out of that cycle and say, hey, what can I do right now? What choices can I make that help me to determine what's going to happen next, right? And those might be little things that are related to, for example, like, hey, if you haven't spoken to your friends lately, jump on a call with them, right? And have a conversation. Or if you, want to share something, kind with someone else you don't know, right? Like, open the door for someone, or, pay it forward in a coffee shop, right? And so these little things that I think can make a huge difference in your life are just very helpful to focus on, so that you don't think about the future as something far out, which creates uncertainty and anxiety, but think about the future as something very close, happening right now.
Yeah, we'll double click on all of that. This is I'd say perhaps an inflection point in people's lives where they're saying, okay, I've related to, reacted to, responded to life in thus a fashion, and I want to change because I'm lacking peace, I'm lacking clarity, direction, whatever. I think you're going to add value to answering that question today, but I want to back up. You were Google's first Chief Innovation Evangelist. I'd love to hear really the backstory on you, how that came to be, where all of these ideas began to galvanize.
Yes. I like to talk about the future, the past, but I don't love it, because I think it's more important to talk about what's next. But happy to dive a little bit into the past and just for
just frame up context.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's helpful, but the past has passed, and so we can't change it and can't influence it. So, and that's what I see a lot of people are doing. They're talking a lot about the past and how good it was and how helpful and so forth. And for me, it's also important to balance that out with talking about the future. But I hope we're going to do that next. So I've spent 12 and a half years at Google and as Google's first Chief Innovation Evangelist. And it was just an incredible time, wonderful people to work with, very bright minds, people with great hearts, but also like just in a culture that, celebrates new ideas, that allows you to experiment with ideas and so forth. So I had probably the time of my life. And what was fascinating is that when I started off, I basically visited about 27 offices, trying to find the Google way to innovate, right? And worked with hundreds and hundreds of people and trying to figure out like what is the way they come up with these ideas and put these ideas out into the world. And what I found was that it's not about resources, it's not about time, it's not about being in a specific creative environment. It was always that people were in a specific mind state. So they basically had a perspective on the future that was, curious, that was open, that was optimistic. They liked to experiment and they showed empathy. And for me, what I found was these dimensions really, or these human qualities, right, are in everyone, right? But these individuals, they just dialed it up, right? So they just, were incredibly curious, incredibly open. They had a very optimistic outlook and so forth. And so what I then did was basically build a curriculum around these things and trying to bring that way of thinking and being to everyone in the company. And that really helped to shape this culture around innovation and the future. And, being in the sometimes driver's seat when it comes to the future, I felt, I'm very lucky. And, I need to share that with more people. And I left Google 2 years ago, exactly actually 2 years ago, because I felt I was getting a little bit too comfortable, right? You're working with great people, you're working in an environment, again, like that is super creative and all these things. But my learning curve was kind of like flattening. And I felt I had so much to share with people, how to craft the future, how to build the future, that I wanted to share that with more people. And that led me to walking out of Google on my own terms, at my own pace, just with a smile on my face and saying like, hey, this is going to be a step into uncertainty, but that's what I choose. And, let's share what I've learned with everyone
Yes.
I can find.
It's really a cool story of bravery and courage and being a future optimist, which you describe yourself as. I want to ask this question before we dive into talking future. Do you think then, Frederik, based upon what you shared earlier and our knee-jerk reflex toward resisting change, etc., do you think some people, gosh, this is even hard to think about or say out loud, but do you think some people are just innately wired for passivity and failure?
Not necessarily. I wouldn't agree with
Okay.
that, right?
Yeah,
Not
unpack that. Tell me why.
not in terms of like wired to fail. I think we need to fail from time to time, right? Otherwise, we're not pushing the boundaries too hard, right?
This
We need
necessitates a redefinition of failure, though. I
absolutely,
apologize
yeah.
for interrupting, but redefine failure, and then let me hear you kind of unpack this, because I think it will set some folks free as they're listening to us to say, Frederik, Chris, I can't step into this because everything I touch flails out. I want to unpack that.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you, and it needs to be redefined as learning, right? I think failure always leads to learning something, right? And we learn best if something goes wrong. And whatever you learn, right, you can take that and make something out of it, right? And for me, it comes down to experimentation and trying things, right? Every experiment doesn't lead to failure, it leads to learning, right? And if you see it that way, I think it's very powerful because then you are actually eager to try out more things, right? You're taking these risks and you're giving your whatever you want to do next a chance. And I think for me, the worst thing that can happen is that you don't try, right? because you're afraid that, something might go wrong. And if you stop trying and stop trying new things, especially, then you're just stuck, right? And being stuck is not very helpful if you want to craft, a better future for yourself. And you shared something that I wanna build upon, right? I call myself a future optimist, and which allows me to focus on the opportunities that the future holds rather than just predicting trends, right? I think a lot of people are trying to predict trends and predict like what's coming next. I don't think that should be the right focus, right? It's about cultivating a positive outlook that enables us to shape a better future rather than passively anticipating it, right? And so my mission is really I want to help others build the future they want to create. And many people just don't know how to do it or where to start and eventually get caught in the futures others are choosing for them, right? And I think that's a really bad place to be when others are choosing, what's going to happen to you and what's going to happen next. And so unlike futurists probably who predict the future and they do a great job doing that based on trends, a future optimist really focuses on shaping an actionable, positive vision of the future and really emphasizes the personal collective agency in creating these preferable outcomes. And so I think probably everybody should call themselves a future optimist because it's really just about creating where you want to and how you want to live next.
Define for me or separate then the inference of future optimist versus I'm going to rely on willpower to just muscle my way through. Science proves that willpower has limitations to it, but I think what I'm hearing you say regarding future optimist has a different starting place, and I think it is in mind state, not just mindset. You want to unpack that?
Absolutely, yes. There's some powerful research happening from some of my colleagues at Stanford University around future self, right? So they do a research on this notion of imagining your future self. And it really examines how individuals' visions of themselves in the future affect their current behaviors and decisions. And so some of the findings indicate that a clearer and more connected sense of one's future self is actually associated, and here it comes, with better decision making in areas such as health, finance, and personal development. So some of the interventions they did, like, visualization exercises that, Christopher, and I know, and maybe some of our listeners too, you just visualize how you want to, live in the future and what you want to be and so forth. Or even writing to one's future self, right? A letter helps actually strengthen this connection and potentially leading to improved life outcomes. So what they found is as soon as people can visualize their future selves, they can actually trace it back to people making better decisions. And for example, some of the findings were that people were putting twice as much money towards retirement when they could see a clear picture of themselves in the future than compared to others who didn't connect with their future self. So it changes how you see health and like what you make as choices today in terms of healthy behaviors around food, exercising and so forth. When you can actually envision your future self, and I think that's something very powerful.
Too many people, what I hear you say is that too many people struggle to see the forest for the trees, and this exercise allows us to zoom out to then make short-term decisions based upon long-term desires and goals.
Exactly.
So, okay, make the case then, Frederik, if you would, for radical optimism. I know this is going to sound like a double down, but make the case for radical optimism right now in 2024 when cynicism and bitterness is thriving in culture, when negativity is thriving, when it seems like the world and every system therein is just on fire.
Yeah, such a great question. It's a big question, right? For me, it comes down to this notion of a mind state, right? Which is not a mindset. I think a mindset is long term and it's, based on your beliefs and your attitudes and your past experiences. And, it's a powerful concept. And I'm happy that we're we found this, right, in the past in research and how it's helpful. But also, it's something long term. And like whenever somebody tells you, "Hey, Christopher, change your mindset," right? Like how often do you actually change
Yeah.
it, or are you able to do it, right? It's
Yes.
so hard
Right.
because it's based again like on our values and beliefs and everything that's deeply ingrained in us. What I want to focus us is a mind state. And a mind state is something that is the perspective you have in any given moment that determines how you experience the present. And that is something short term, that's something we can influence, that is something that we have power over and can control. And so I think for me, that is something that we want to do want to focus on moving forward. And the argument for radical optimism is something that we all need to make, because we can look at a situation, as a pessimist, seeing the glass half empty, using that metaphor, or seeing the glass half full. A radical optimist actually doesn't see the glass half full; they see the potential to fill the glass even further. And
Can you
so,
say that again, please? I'm like my bubble's getting burst right now, and it's really good.
yeah, I think we put a lot of, people always in these two categories, right? Like you're pessimist, you see the glass half empty, or you're an optimist, you see the glass half full. For me, a radical optimistic person sees not just the glass half full, but sees the potential to fill it even further. And, so radical optimism is proactive, right? It seeks to transform situations, asking, how can this be better? Right? It looks for the potential improvements and opportunities for growth. And it sees possibilities, right? So radical optimism digs deeper to uncover these hidden possibilities, really aiming to make everyone or make every moment a chance for exceptional outcomes. And that's something where I feel we can all do a better job at. And it's something that you can train yourself in. You can, train your mind to see these opportunities in every situation. And there is hope, I think, not just hope for us, but there is a way to actually do that.
What's the difference between radical optimism, Frederick, and then what some might call toxic positivity, where we put the glossy spin on tragedy, where we ignore the maladies of life? What's the difference?
Yes. So I think it's very important to, you know, be realistic as well. Like you have to acknowledge and accept that things are happening, right? And some of these things are really, we can put on labels like bad, or like they're really a tragedy, or whatever that is. And I think I haven't said that this is not what a radical optimist would do. I think it's very important, but instead of being stuck and say like, okay, I accept the situation, but I don't know what to do. We need to look for what is the better here, right? What's something that is the improvement that we can look at. And so to give you an example, right? If you're let's look at an easy one probably. You're planning a picnic, out you know in the wild, and it starts to rain, right? So a normal or regular optimist would say, at least we can have a picnic another day, right? So that's like where you say like, okay, it's just that the time might not work out and we do it another day. A radical optimist says, what's better is that the rain gives us a chance to create an impromptu indoor adventure, fostering creativity and bonding in a unique way, right? So you're reframing that to an incredible opportunity now, where you move inside, with your friends, and you're doing like an indoor adventure now, right? And you really look for the better. It's a simple example, but it just gives you, I think, a taste of what it can actually do if you're using that radical lens on everything.
Yeah, so change itself, I think, is a key thread through this conversation of how we live future ready. You view change as being constructive, not a threat. I want to ask, sort of pulling the curtain back, how did you get there in your mind? We're wired to value predictability. I mean, take us inside the real life case study that was August 2020 as wildfires forced you and your family to evacuate your home.
Yes, when you have a police officer knock on your door with an evacuation order, right, telling you like you have 10 minutes as a family of five to leave your home, and you don't know if you're going to ever return, right? You understand that the only way to look at that situation is to see it as an opportunity, right? And I know it's hard because sometimes you might just blame the police officer for the wildfires, or you blame kind of like the climate change, or you blame like everybody, right? But that's not helpful. Blaming is not a helpful strategy, right? The only helpful strategy you can have is look at that as an opportunity to first, right, gather everything that you want to take with you, and then decide what's most valuable to you, right, in 10 minutes. And if you find that being together as a family and being connected, and this is basically everything that you can value, right, is a first grade exercise. And then look at it to actually help you change your lifestyle as well moving forward. Because we learned in this situation, being away 10 days and not knowing if we can return to our home, that change is happening all the time, but you can see that as an opportunity. And so we changed our lifestyle coming back. Fortunately, nothing happened to our house. The fire was burning 1 mile away. But we came back and said, like, this is now for us the opportunity to live with nature in a totally different relationship, right? So now we grow our own food. We do forest management, which is actually a term. We trying to give back to nature more than we take, right? My wife is a master gardener, and so she has a lot of interest in that as well. And we just live as a family more, aligned with nature. And we all realize that change is something that happens all the time. And if we neglect it, if we trying to fight it, if we try to disagree with it, right, it's not helpful. You can only embrace the opportunity in it. And there's this law of nature that which is related to impermanence, right? Everything is changing all the time. And as soon as you really deeply understood this, like that everything is changing all the time, then you build a different relationship with change.
Yeah, this is sort of the premise of what we were talking about before we hit record here. Stolberg's Master of Change, homeostasis versus allostasis. But this requires of us, it required of you and your family, an ability to orient your thinking. You talked about this in your book, What's Next Is Now. Walk us through the process, if you could, Frederik, of that choice. Walk us through, in a modality, like how do we orient our thinking? How did you get there? What's necessary to just engineer this inside of our psyche?
Yes, it's something that you can train.
How?
So there's different ways, right? It's not like there's one like 10-minute training, exercise that you can use, but it's a way of looking at life, and it's a way of first accepting that everything is changing, and then looking for the opportunity in that change, right? And some of the changes are incredibly hard. You gave some examples, right, where change is happening, and the first reaction, the first feeling we have, it's incredibly hard, right? Why is that happening? We can't explain it. We're trying to resist it, and so forth. But that's not, again, like something that is a valid strategy, and that is not a helpful way of looking at life if you know that everything is changing all the time. And so one of the mechanisms I use to train myself, I went on an extended 10 days silent meditation retreat to really train my mind to see what's changing, right, over the days and over the hours, sitting down for 12 hours plus for 10 days, not speaking, not looking at your phone, not writing, not reading, not anything, right, that we used to cope with change, right? And it was fascinating because, you observe that your thoughts are changing, your physical condition is changing, right? If you have a pain in your neck from sitting down too long, that's going to change for sure. If you feel angry about something, that is going to change. And so just by observing your own mind changing and your own physical condition changing as well, I think that was for me a helpful realization that, hey, nothing is permanent, right? There's nothing that's going to stay. So why not looking at everything as an opportunity and trying to train yourself in that? And there's a couple of helpful probably exercises in the book you're referencing that really were helpful to me and that I'm using all the time that can help you to build that muscle that allows you to see more opportunities.
Will you walk us through one of those exercises?
Sure. There is an interesting one that I like, which is really helping you to tap into a deeply human quality, and that's related to curiosity, right? We all born as curious individuals. We love to ask questions, when we're young. Not so much when we grow up, right? The amount of questions are actually decreasing. And also like we somehow, don't follow our curiosity to everything anymore, right? We rather play it safe, or like, we're not asking all these too hard questions anymore. So how you can train your mind to be what I call compulsive curious is a technique to actually do upside down questionings. And so upside down question is something where you start, with a question. For example, I wonder how I can maintain a healthier lifestyle, right? That's probably a question a lot of people ask themselves. Or I wonder how we can make education better with AI, right? Great question nowadays. Or I wonder how I can improve my relationship with my partner. And so these I wonder questions are great starting points because they allow us to ask a question, right? And not like, lead with an answer. But now it comes, right? If you turn these questions upside down, you can actually unlock more curiosity. For example, what habits would lead to an unhealthy lifestyle? Or what could you do to make AI negatively impact education? Or what actions would damage your relationship with your partner? Right. So you take those questions that I wonder questions and you just turn them upside down, which allows you to even, create more questions and be curious about something and trying to discover some answer to that. And I think that's an easy way of practicing questioning, but also allowing your curiosity to really help you to discover something new.
Let's hit the bullseye here for folks. Change we've identified today. Change is not the exception to the rule, it's the constant. What happens then when we resist change, when we ignore change, when we bury our heads in the sand, so to speak? What's the cost?
Again, like you have to put a lot of effort then towards your life when you say, I don't want to, follow that change, or I want to resist change. Because again, like change is happening all the time. It's the law of nature. And so if you want to fight that, you can try that. But it doesn't lead to any opportunities. It doesn't lead to a future where you say, I want to create this future, right? And then you're moving towards a future that is decided and chosen by someone else for you. And I wouldn't like to live in that future, right? I don't know if you would, Christopher, but, and I don't think any of our listeners would actually like that, because then you're approaching what's next with a passive strategy, a passive way of looking at what's going to happen. And yeah, that's just not, I think, something we want to do. And at the same time, it costs probably a lot of effort as well. There's less effort in like looking at situations as something that can create an opportunity or is an opportunity already.
Okay. You talked about this in your book a little bit. Maybe I'll just ask the question in this way. There is a muscle then that needs to be developed in us. Perhaps is the muscle curiosity? Is it resilience? Is it perseverance? Because we are neurobiologically wired to, number one, resist change, but then we're wired to survive. And the unknown poses a threat to quote unquote survival, right? So what is that muscle? You talked about it in the book a little bit. Like, what is the muscle that really needs to be developed? If we can hone in on that, is it curiosity? Is it resilience? Is it the muscle of, and we can unpack this further, like, is it the muscle of being future ready? What is it?
Exactly. For me, it's that future ready mind state. That's the muscle I would like people to train more of, which not just puts you in a position where you can be prepared for what's ever going to happen next, but you actually creating it. And that's something very powerful. And, resilience is great. I think, there's lots of arguments why we should develop that muscle. For me, it's 5 dimensions that I describe, right? Which is radical optimism, it's unreserved openness, it's compulsive curiosity, experimentation, and empathy. Those 5 dimensions really, for me, are ways of looking at the future that allows you to see more opportunities. And being a little bit more optimistic, a little bit more open, having more curiosity, and trying experiments that lead to learning and show that deep empathy, that expansive empathy, and how I describe it, is something that in combination is such a powerful way of crafting your own future and make better choices, that I never heard someone saying like, yeah, I don't want to be, more optimistic, or I don't want to be more curious, or show more empathy. So I think there's a lot that we can not just agree to, but like practice that more and train it even more often.
Yeah, so what I heard you say, Frederik, is in a way those 5 act like on a dashboard for us, and they can show us where we're at in each facet of that, in each silo of that. How do we then, if we're looking at the dashboard, how do we read it well so that we're growing, adapting, learning? In other words, you can take any one of those 5 that you just described. When I'm looking at those, is that the measure that I want to say, okay, if I'm going to be future ready, I want to improve in this, because it appears as though I'm lacking a little bit in this. You want to unpack that, just nuance that a little bit more for me?
Yes, I like that metaphor of a dashboard. For me, that's going in a direction that's too much of a framework, right? I don't want to,
I'm so strategic. Sorry, that's just the way I think.
have people having another framework they need to learn, or like another theory they need to follow. These are all human qualities that we already have,
Frederik.
right? And
Hang
so
on. Wow.
I think we know when we're a little bit more open, right, to new ideas, new thoughts, new experiences. And we know that. And giving that a try, for example, will always lead to an opportunity, right? And I think if you're using that metaphor of like, look at a corridor, right? Like with doors down the corridor. And most people would probably like peek into 1 or 2 doors, right? Or even go to the doors they already know what's behind it. But if you're unreserved open, you open every door and you step into it. And I think that's the metaphor of, just for one of these dimensions that I described, being unreserved open, because it then makes change your friend and helps you embrace the unknown, where the most exciting opportunities are actually awaiting.
Is it fair to say then that becoming future ready is more mind state than tactical in its expression?
Absolutely, yes.
So what does it take then? I know this may sound like we're going backwards a little bit in the conversation perhaps, but will you walk us through, dang it, I'm such a strategic person. I want to say framework, but I don't want to box us in. What does it take to be future ready? Is there a posture, boxes that we can check? Again, here I am with the language of dashboard. What can we do to ensure that we are becoming future ready, Frederik? I don't even know how to ask this question well because I feel like I'm putting my foot in my mouth.
Yes, yes. Again, like bringing back that notion of a mind state, I think could be helpful,
Yes.
which is
Okay.
the perspective you have in any given moment that determines how you experience the present. And that is, guided by your thoughts and your feelings. So it's something that is a perspective in any moment. And that perspective can change. And we have the power to change that. So being future ready means that we are trying to be aware of which perspective do we have in any situation on the present moment, and then choosing to be more optimistic, to be more open, to be more curious, to experiment more, and to have more empathy. Absolutely, and that's something where we all can make better choices in the moment. And there is, you mentioned the book, and there are 14 people that I feature that, for me, you know, build incredible futures for themselves in their personal lives. And, just reading those stories and or listening to those stories is something very helpful, I guess, because then you can relate to how you can build your own future as well with that specific mind state. And so I would just highly recommend, like, tuning in some of these stories because they can serve as an inspiration for you where you feel like, oh, that could be me. And, this person, you know, is living a radically optimistic life, or they're incredibly open. Like, there's one person I feature, and if we with that topic of openness, who goes on extended hiking trips, over a couple of months without a plan, without a strategy, without actually knowing where they're going to sleep, where who they're going to meet, obviously, and which countries they go. And that openness always, when he comes back, leads to so many opportunities where you're just discovering so many interesting things. And you don't have to follow that plan that we usually like to make about the future, right? And where we get frustrated if that plan didn't turn out, or when we run behind or something like that. And that openness as a practice is something very powerful.
We keep talking about openness and curiosity, and I see those as key drivers, but when openness and curiosity are halted by fear
Mm,
and halted by shame, like that's an internal state that has to be corrected because when fear is the driver, when shame is the driver, the reflex is I have to self-protect, I have to
mhm.
self-promote because I
Yeah,
live in a dangerous world with dangerous people. Hurdling fear and anxiety requires what? Because
yeah,
we've got to hurdle those in order to see potential around us, not threats. This is
absolutely.
like pushing upstream against our neurobiological wiring.
Yes,
How do we do it?
absolutely. Yeah. You know, asking yourself, where does the fear come from, right? Are these the stories we tell ourselves? Or is it because we watched something or read something that creates fear or anxiety? And then just, you know, sometimes stop reading or watching these things, right?
Yeah,
Because,
that's good.
we don't have to watch the news the whole day, because that creates a lot of fear and anxiety, right? And it creates a state where you feel out of control. And focusing back on the things you can actually control and asking yourself, hey, if I see that, you know, the news in some areas of the world, do I actually have something I can control here? Can I contribute something or not? Right? And if you can't do anything about it, right? Sometimes it's just helpful to not continue to watch it or continue to read about it, right? At the same time, also, if you feel like you can contribute something and do something about it, absolutely do that, right? Like, control the controllables. That's the phrase a lot of people are using, and I think that's a very powerful way of looking at fear as well. Like asking yourself, where does the fear come from? Can I control something in that situation or not? And you would be surprised, more often we can actually control something, right? We can control at least how we respond to situations, right? We can control if we're seeing something as an opportunity to engage, or we see something as a potential as well. And so, yeah, one of the ways of coping with that probably is like, look where the fear is coming from, and then you know, if it's coming from external sources, maybe just stop following them. And if it comes internally about the stories we tell ourselves, ask yourself, are these stories true, right? Is there some truth around these stories, or is it just a story that we're building up? And because our mind loves to do that, right? Just telling us all these interesting stories to protect ourselves, right? So we build up these horrific scenarios in our minds, and most of them are actually not, something there's any truth about it. And so we need to check in and say, like, hey, why I'm building this story in my mind, is that actually something helpful or not?
Mm-hmm. This is what scientists call, folks, metacognition. This is thinking about our thinking, being aware of what's happening inside the recesses of our mind, because not everything we think is true or productive.
Yes, most of it actually.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, you argue then that the unknown is exactly where we want to be. I want to know why, because even saying that makes me shudder.
Again, the unknown is something where you can discover opportunity. Again, like if you're using your curiosity, you're basically in the land of the unknown, asking questions and trying to discover something. And as I mentioned earlier, for me, stepping outside of my job at that time, right, in my life, and saying like, okay, I choose the unknown, stepping outside of Google and doing something else, is something where I just have had a lot of confidence that there's something that, I can learn, something I can explore, something I can try out. And you would not achieve something if you then, would just sit down and do nothing, right? So you have to give things a try. You have to start, experiment. You have to also be radically optimistic about what's coming next. And then at the same time, follow that belief that whatever comes next is your choice, right? Or most of it. And that's something where I feel like, being in the unknown, which we are all in when it comes to the future. Nobody can predict the future. Sorry. It's just the truth. So we're all in this land of the unknown. But if you can be the one that sees opportunities, and at the same time you can imagine what you want your life to be, then you have something very powerful that you can use.
Experimentation, then, and radical optimism require good questions. The point of asking questions isn't to find answers. You argue this, that the point is to probe and inquire for the sake of learning and understanding new paths to explore. Say more about that.
Yes, maybe it's the last domain for humanity here, right? Asking good questions, as technology is providing perfect answers nowadays, right? If you use any technology, right, you get a pretty decent answer to most questions. And so asking good questions and inquire about, not just the world, but also about yourself. You talked a little bit about that, like, inquiring like, how am I thinking at the moment? How am I feeling at the moment? And asking those questions is very powerful. As I've observed, the best leaders in the world are the leaders who are asking the best questions, and they don't lead with an answer or an idea or a solution, but they lead with a good question that people are inspired by and want to find an answer to.
That's really good. We're making really a full circle in this conversation with the curiosity, the asking good questions, et cetera, leads us to this place of being willing to step out into the unknown, step by step, What do you think is the underlying motivation, Frederik, that opens us up to even head in that direction in the first place?
I don't think you have a choice, right?
Oh boy. Yeah.
The
Yep.
past is gone. Sorry. The present is very difficult to be in, right? Your mind doesn't like to be, in the present. That's why meditation and mindfulness meditation are so hard to practice because our mind loves to go back into the past or kind of like thinks about the future. And so the only thing I think left for us is to really trying to be in that future ready mind state and trying to embrace that unknown and trying to, make the best out of that.
Will you teach us sort of to this notion of experimentation? You talk about 4 ways to experiment well. Will you unpack that?
Yes. You know, maybe one point I can dive deeper into. Experimentation is something that always leads to a learning. And I think if we deeply understand that, it can be very powerful because then we're, as you said earlier, we are trying to put a different label on failure. And, you know, experimentation is something that allows you to really understand quickly how things work and if they work. And, you know, we don't like to experiment, right? Most of us, right? We like to, take approaches that have worked in the past or ideas or solutions and just apply them again and again. But that's not experimentation. Experimentation is taking a risk and doing something new that leads to some learnings. And one of the things that I found in my work is how can you incentivize people to take more risks and trying to experiment more? And so what what I've trying to do is I looked into nature and was inspired by nature, and there are penguins that are usually on an ice shelf, right? And it's fascinating if you observe these penguins. There's always one penguin that jumps first into the water. It's the courageous penguin. They take a risk of finding food or becoming food, 50% chance. The rest of the colony basically just stands back and trying to watch like if that little penguin comes back up again with food or if the penguin is gone, and that's basically helping them to decide what they're going to do. And in some organizations I just observed that no one is going to take a risk anymore, and trying to encourage and motivate people to take risks, we created the Penguin Award, which is handed to the person who tries something new, right? Without knowing if that's going to, you know, be successful or fails, but it always creates a learning. And what happens then is if you really recognize and reward people for taking a risk, then, more and more people are able to step forward and jump into the water. And it's creating an environment where, people feel that also at the same time, if no one jumps into the water, right, the whole colony will disappear, right? So some people need to step forward and take that risk. And if you applaud them and recognize them and give them an award, even if it's like just a little penguin puppet or figure, that's enough to say, hey, we want you to take those risks and we want you to jump into the cold water because that helps us to learn about the future, and that's the learnings we want to have.
Frederik, you've given us really a treasure trove of gold today. Folks, stay with me after this conversation with Frederik. We are going to take the deep dive into some self-reflection questions. Again, like the point of information is to apply it that we would experience transformation. So again, folks, stay with me as soon as I'm done here with Frederik. But Frederik, anything else today? I'm really thankful for your time. Is there a way to even distill what we've talked about today into a single distillation or call to action that we could leave with folks?
Yes, I think it's coming down to those two questions, right? Or let's say three questions. The first question that we shouldn't ask ourselves is, what will the future bring? Just don't follow that question or don't ask that question, right? Because that's a passive approach to the future. Rather ask yourself, what future do I want to create? And, trying to follow that question. A third question that I want people to take with them, and I've learned that for myself whenever people ask me, when I was young, like, what do you want to be in the future, right? I always hated that question because I never had an answer. I never had a clear picture about like a job or a position or an individual or whatever it was, right? I would rather ask today, how do you want to be in the future? Because that leads to the qualities that you want to build and develop over time and even grow. So if you ask yourself, how do you want to be in the future, right? There might things that come up and say, like, hey, I want to be more kind in the future. I want to be more loving in the future. I want to be more open. I want to be more curious. I want to be more empathetic, whatever it is. And I think that's the right question that we should ask ourselves more often is what future do I want to create? So what future do I want to create and how do I want to be in the future?
Excellent. Frederik, thank you so much. Today was really a gift, a huge deposit to all of us, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I'd love for folks to stay connected to your present work. Obviously, we're going to put a link to the new book in the show notes at wintoday.tv, but Frederik, where can people track with you and your work?
I think the book is probably a good starting point if you want to dive deeper into some of these things that we unpacked today. Book is called What's Next Is Now. And yeah, you can find me everywhere. Yeah. So please reach out, send me a message, connect with me online. Happy to help you discover your future.
That's good. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.